Diesel fuel and antiseptic don't mix well, but in the back of a Hercules, nobody cares what anything smells like. Renata Solberg had spent 4 years learning to breathe through worse. Now she was breathing through the particular brand of institutional misery that is a hospital break room at 6:47 in the morning. Burnt coffee, someone's leftover salmon from the night before, and the faint chemical sweetness of hand sanitizers applied too many times on skin that was already cracking at the knuckles. She poured herself a cup of the coffee anyway. It looked like the runoff from a construction site and tasted approximately the same. "You're floating today," said Dempsey, without looking up from the scheduling tablet. Dempsey was the charge nurse at Pinneridge Regional Hospital's emergency department. A man who wore his authority the way some people wear ill-fitting suits, always slightly too tight across the shoulders, always just a little crooked. We had 2 call-outs: you'll be on vitals and patient transport. Keep yourself available and stay out of the trauma bays unless I specifically direct you there. Renata looked at him over the rim of her cup. Understood. "You float, people always say that," Dempsey muttered, still not looking up. "And then you go wandering into places you're not supposed to be." She didn't answer. There wasn't a version of answering that ended well. She refilled the cup, tucked the mug against her palm, and walked out into the department. The ED at Pinneridge was not a large hospital. It sat 40 kilometers outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario, in that particular geography of northern Canada where the trees come right up to the edge of everything. Parking lots, rooftops, the cracked asphalt of the ambulance bay. On a quiet morning, it smelled like pine resin seeping through the ventilation. On a busy morning, it smelled like everything else. This was a medium morning. The kind where the board had 7 patients, 2 of them waiting for psychiatric consults. One of them a 16-year-old with a sprained ankle who was loudly resentful of the whole situation. Renata moved through it the way she moved through most things, efficiently and without announcement. She had been floating at Pinneridge for 11 months. Before that, she'd floated at St. Michael's in Thunder Bay for 4 months. Before that, a locum agency. Before that, nothing she put on a resume in any detail. The resume just said Canadian Armed Forces Medical Technician, 2016 to 2022, and left the particulars out. Interviewers never pushed. They needed warm bodies who could take blood pressure and push gurneys and smile at frightened people. They weren't looking for particulars. She was good at being unremarkable. She had worked very hard to become good at it. The first 2 hours passed in the way of all early morning emergency shifts, a controlled, grinding tedium punctuated by small moments of genuine urgency. She transported an elderly man named Mr. Okafor from triage to Bay 7, walking slowly because he was on oxygen and his gait was shuffling, and she could see by the way he held himself that his hips were bad and probably had been for years. She took vitals on a woman with chest pain who turned out to have a panic attack and spent 15 minutes sitting beside her, not talking, just present, while the woman's breathing came back down to something workable. She restocked the isolation cart outside Bay 4. She was good at all of it. She had been good at all of it since she was 22 years old, and a master corporal named Thibodeau had grabbed her by the collar in Kandahar and said, "Solberg, slow down, slow your hands down. The patient can feel your panic through your fingers." And she had slowed her hands down, and the patient had lived, and she had never forgotten. Thibodeau had died 8 months later in a vehicle incident near Kabul. She didn't think about that if she could help it. She was thinking about the isolation cart, specifically about the fact that the N95 inventory was 3 boxes short of what the manifest said it should be when she heard the first sound. It didn't come through the air, it came through the floor. A vibration, low, rhythmic, too heavy to be a helicopter from the regional air ambulance. Renata went still. Her hand was resting on the edge of the cart, and she felt the tremor travel up through the cart's steel legs and into her palm, and her body understood it before her brain did, and her body said, "That is a lot of rotor." Her brain caught up a half-second later and said, 2, maybe 3, coming in low. She set down the inventory clipboard with a deliberate, quiet movement. Around her, the department was continuing as though nothing had happened, because to them nothing had. The monitors beeped. A physician named Dr. Nakamura was on the phone at the nursing station. 2 nurses were arguing about the overnight charting system. Nobody else felt it. The vibration was still too subtle, still arriving through concrete rather than through air. But Renata knew the difference between a BK-117 doing a rooftop approach and what she was feeling right now. She had learned that difference in a forward operating base, lying in the dirt at 2 in the morning, waiting. The sound of a heavy lift rotary coming in had a specific weight to it, a specific dread. She pressed herself back against the wall beside Bay 4, not dramatically, just quietly to the side. Habit. The sound broke the surface of hearing about 40 seconds later. By then, it was no longer subtle, it was enormous. It was the kind of sound that makes fillings hurt and car alarms go off in parking lots, a deep concussive thudding that rolled across the hospital's flat roof and down through the walls, and the fluorescent lights above Renata's head actually flickered once, just once, with the vibration. And then the red phone rang. The red phone at Pinneridge Regional lived in a cradle on the charge desk and was connected directly to the Northern Ontario Air Ambulance Coordination Center. It rang approximately 4 times a year, and never for anything small. Dempsey stared at it for what felt like a full 5 seconds. Then he picked it up. Renata watched his face. She watched it go from irritation to confusion to a particular shade of pale that she associated with people receiving information. Their nervous systems were not equipped to process. His mouth moved. He was saying something. Then he was listening. Then the listening was over, and he set the phone down with a strange, careful precision, like someone setting down an explosive. "Code Orange," he said to the room, and his voice was wrong, not loud enough. "Clear the trauma bay. We have an incoming military medevac." "They are not." He stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "They are not using the roof pad. They are landing in the north lot." "Repeat, north parking lot." "I need trauma bay 1 cleared now. I need O negative pulled from blood bank. Move." The department fractured. It wasn't organized chaos. It was the disorganized kind, the real kind. The kind where 2 nurses collide in a doorway because neither one had a clear directive. Where the crash cart gets pulled, and then nobody knows where it's supposed to go. Where Dr. Nakamura is striding very fast and issuing orders in a clipped voice, but the orders are slightly ahead of where the situation actually is, which is a problem that will only become apparent in about 90 seconds. Renata did not move from the wall. She stood there and let the noise wash over her, and she watched the ambulance bay doors at the far end of the department. The overhead lights were still flickering slightly from the downwash of the rotors outside. She could smell jet exhaust now. It was seeping through the ventilation. She recognized it, the way you recognize the voice of someone you spent 4 years trying to forget. The ambulance bay doors came open hard. Not the automatic slide, the manual crash bar. Someone hit it from outside with force, and both doors swung inward, and the sound of the rotors came pouring in with the cold October air and the smell of fuel and something else underneath. The smell of copper and mud, which is the smell of a person who has been bleeding for too long outdoors. 3 of them came through. Tactical gear, multicam pattern, plate carriers, comms equipment, the works. 2 of them were carrying a stretcher between them. The third, a woman, compact, moving with the controlled velocity of someone who had been moving like that for a very long time, was running alongside the stretcher with one hand pressed to the patient's shoulder. They came in like they already owned the room, because in their minds they did, because the person on the stretcher was running out of time, and none of the geography of civilian authority was relevant to that fact. Bay 1, Dr. Nakamura called out, moving toward them. Bring him to Bay 1. I'm the attending. What are we? His name is Rourke, the woman with the tactical gear said. Her voice was very calm, too calm, the kind of calm that is constructed rather than felt. GSW, left thorax, pneumo on the same side. We've got a flutter seal on it. It's been 40 minutes since injury. BP was 72/50 when we loaded. That was 14 minutes ago. It's gone south since. GSW? Nakamura said, and Renata could hear the specific note in his voice that meant I am an emergency physician at a regional hospital in Northern Ontario, and I have not once treated a gunshot wound in 9 years of practice. Training accident, said the woman flatly, in a tone that meant she would say no more about it. They got Rourke onto the Bay 1 bed. The nurses swarmed. The monitor went on. The numbers that came back were bad. Saturation at 81%. Heart rate 138, thready. The flutter seal on his left chest was working, but it wasn't enough. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, and his skin was the particular gray of someone whose body had already started making decisions. Dr. Nakamura stood at the head of the bed and looked at the chest, and Renata, from the wall where she had not moved, watched him look. She watched him catalog what he was seeing, and she watched him arrive at the knowledge that the next step was a chest tube, and that the chest tube needed to happen in the next 4 minutes, and that he had placed, in his career, possibly a dozen of them, and the last one had been 3 years ago, during a trauma rotation in Toronto. One of the soldiers, the larger one, broad-shouldered, a call sign patch on his left chest that read Cardinal, looked up from the foot of the bed. His eyes swept the room. They were not panicked eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had been in rooms like this before, in other countries in worse conditions, and who was performing a rapid assessment of available resources. His eyes stopped on Renata. She didn't move. She had her back against the wall, and she was wearing generic green scrubs, and her hair was up, and she looked like what she was supposed to look like, which was a float nurse killing time near a supply cart. She looked unremarkable. Cardinal stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said very quietly to the woman in the tactical gear, "Sergeant, 9 o'clock." The woman looked at Renata. Renata looked back. The woman's face was weathered in the specific way that outdoor work in bad weather produces, with lines at the corners of her eyes that were not from laughing. She took 2 steps away from the bed, keeping her voice low enough that Nakamura wouldn't hear. "You've got the hands," she said, not a question. "I work vitals and transport," Renata said. Her voice was flat. She had spent 11 months making it flat. "I'm afloat." "That's not what I asked." The woman's eyes dropped to Renata's hands, then came back up. "I asked about the hands, the way you're standing, the way you came away from that wall when we came in and then decided not to." Renata said nothing. "Rourke has 4 minutes, the woman said. "Maybe 5. Nakamura is going to try, and he's not going to get there fast enough. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you already know it's true, and because I need you to make a decision right now." The monitor at Bay 1 let out a sustained alarm. Rourke's saturation had dropped to 76. Renata looked at the wall in front of her. She thought about the drive to work that morning through the dark, and the birch trees, and the Tim Hortons, cup still rolling around in the passenger footwell. She thought about how good she had gotten at mornings, at routines, at the specific quiet dignity of a life with no emergencies in it. Then she crossed the room. She didn't run. Running makes everyone else panic faster. She walked with a particular economy of movement that the woman in the tactical gear recognized immediately, because it was the same economy of movement that people develop when they have spent a lot of time in confined spaces with people who were very close to dying. "Step back," she said to Nakamura. And then, because he was a good doctor who was looking at her with more relief than he probably wanted to show, "I need you right here, to my left. You're going to connect the drain when I tell you. You've done that." "Yes," said Nakamura. "Good." She looked at the charge nurse. "Dempsey, thoracostomy tray. Now, 28 French tube or higher, if you have it. Go." Dempsey went. He went fast. He had a look on his face that she had seen before, on people who were being organized by someone who sounded like they could not conceive of being told no. She pulled gloves on and she looked at Rourke's chest, and she placed her fingers along the 5th intercostal space, mapping the geography of a person she did not know by the topography of his ribs, and she thought, I'm sorry this is going to hurt. I'm sorry there isn't time to make it hurt less." "Hold him," she said. Cardinal and the other soldier moved to the head and foot of the bed without being asked twice. The tray landed beside her. She did not look at Dempsey to thank him. She picked up the scalpel. She made the incision. It is not a procedure that looks like medicine from the outside. From the outside, it looks like exactly what it is, a deliberate wound, made with intention, in a place that does not want to be wounded. One of the nurses made a sound. Renata did not hear it. She was in the space she had learned to go in Kandahar and Kabul, and 2 other places she did not name aloud anymore, the space where everything reduced to what was immediately in front of her, where the whole world became the width of her hands and the problem between them. She spread the tissue. She felt the lung. She swept the channel clear. "Tube," she said, and it was in her hand, and she placed it, and she said, "Connect," and Nakamura connected the drain, and the machine began to pull, and the chest began to breathe, and the saturation monitor climbed 78, 81, 85. "Heart rate coming down," said one of the nurses, quietly, like she was afraid to say it too loud. 96. Renata stepped back. Her gloves were dark to the wrist. Her legs were shaking in a way she was quite certain. Nobody could see because she had locked her knees, and she was not going to let anyone see. "He needs ore," she said to Nakamura. "Right now. Chest is holding, but the exit wound isn't clean, and he's going to bleed into that cavity. You need a thoracic surgeon. Closest is Thunder Bay, 50 minutes by air. Call them and have them ready. He'll make it." She looked at the monitor. "He'll make it now." Nakamura was already on the phone. Hurt. The nurses moved Rourke out of Bay, 1 and down the hall toward the elevator, the steady sound of the gurney wheels fading, and then the bay was quiet. Quiet the way a room is quiet after something very loud has stopped. Cardinal was looking at her. "That's a chest tube," he said. "It is. Float nurses don't usually." "No," she said, "they don't." She stripped the gloves off, balled them up, dropped them into the red waste bin. She didn't look at him. "You're not in the system," said the woman in the tactical gear from the doorway. "We checked when dispatch was routing us. The nursing registry has you. But there's nothing before 2022. And the reason there's nothing before 2022 is because whatever you did before 2022 is under a level of access that a medevac coordinator at NAAC doesn't have." Renata said nothing. "What was your unit?" Cardinal asked. "I work vitals and transport," she said, and she walked out of the bay. She made it to the women's washroom at the end of the hall. She turned the tap on cold and ran her hands under it, and looked at the water going down the drain, and she breathed, slowly, the way Thibodeau had told her to breathe when her hands were shaking. "Out first, Solberg, empty out first, then in. Out first, then in." She heard the door. She didn't turn around. She already knew the footsteps. You spend enough time in places where footsteps matter, you don't forget them. "He's going to make it," said the woman. Her name, Renata had gathered from the exchange in the bay, was Sergeant Lafleur. She set a paper towel on the edge of the sink without being asked. "Because of you. He wasn't going to make it before you. Nakamura would have gotten there." "Nakamura is a good doctor," Lafleur said. "He would have gotten there in about 6 minutes. Rourke had 2. She leaned against the door. "I'm not going to push you on the unit. That's your business. But I want you to know we have a medic position, sergeant level. Attached to 3 CAR, but the posting is based out of Petawawa. It's come open." Renata turned off the tap. "I'm not interested," she said. "Were, once. People change. Some things don't." Lafleur looked at her, and there was no judgment in it, which was almost worse than if there had been. "You didn't freeze. Half the staff in that bay froze, and you walked out of a corner and did what needed doing without anyone telling you to. You didn't even hesitate once you decided." "I hesitated plenty," Renata said. "Before, not during." Lafleur pushed off the door. "That's the difference. Hesitating before is just being a person. Not hesitating during is something else." She reached into the front pouch of her plate carrier and came out with something small. A unit coin, brass, worn at the edges, with a maple leaf on one face and something Renata did not read on the other. She set it on the edge of the sink, next to where the paper towel had been. "That's Rourke's," she said. "He'd want you to have it, if he knew." Renata looked at the coin and did not pick it up. "Where are you watching from?" Lafleur said, and she said it in a way that meant something private, something Renata didn't quite follow. Then she shook her head slightly, almost to herself. "Sorry, forget it." She pushed the door open and was gone. Renata stood in the bathroom for 2 more minutes. She looked at the coin. She looked at the drain. She looked at her own face in the mirror, which was something she normally made a point of doing quickly and then stopping. But this time she looked for a while. 34 years old. 2 years of night classes at Lakehead to get the nursing registration. 11 months of moving from hospital to hospital, like a boat with no anchor. She looked exactly as tired as she felt. She turned the tap back on and washed her face and dried it on the paper towel. Then she straightened up and looked at herself one more time and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and she pulled the door open and walked back out into the department. The bay had been cleaned. The bloody linens were in a yellow biohazard bag. One of the nurses was doing the post-incident restock, moving with the quiet, focused energy of someone who needs to do something with their hands. Dempsey was at the charge desk, on the phone, saying something about incident documentation, and when he saw Renata he paused, and then he said something into the phone and put it down. He looked at her. She looked back at him. "The trauma tray," he said finally. I'll restock it, she said. Well, I didn't. He stopped. You don't have privileges for procedure work. I need to document this. Document it however you need to. She pulled a clean pair of gloves from the box on the cart. What do you need from me? Dempsey looked at her with the expression of a man who has just watched someone do something that has reorganized his understanding of the situation and who has not yet determined what to do with that reorganization. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Bay 6 needs a patient transport to radiology, he said eventually. When you're ready. I'll get to it, she said. She walked back to the isolation cart outside Bay 4. The N95 inventory was still 3 boxes short. She picked up the clipboard and found where she'd left off and kept counting, her pen moving across the form in the thin, even lines she'd learned to write on forms in bad conditions, in bad light, in bad weather, in years she did not put on resumes. Outside, the rotors had been quiet for a long time. The north lot would smell like jet exhaust for the rest of the morning, probably. The birch trees at the edge of the parking lot wouldn't care. They didn't know what a Black Hawk was. They didn't know what any of it meant. The coin was still on the edge of the sink in the women's washroom. She hadn't touched it. She didn't know what she was going to do about that. But Bay 6 needed a transport, and the N95s needed counting, and the fluorescent lights had stopped flickering, and she was still just afloat, moving through the holes in other people's schedules, filling in and then moving on. She clicked her pen. She kept counting. I keep thinking about the coin on the edge of the sink. Renata didn't pick it up. She looked at it, and she left it there. And she walked back out into the department and counted N95 masks and transported a patient to radiology like none of it had happened. And I think that's the part that stays with me most. Not the chest tube, not the rotor wash coming through the walls, not the moment she crossed the room. The coin. What she did with the coin. There's something in that I've been trying to put words to for a while now. I think we tell ourselves a version of the story where the hero reclaims everything at the end, where the moment of action is also the moment of return, and after that, things go back to what they were supposed to be. But Renata didn't do that. She saved Rourke because she couldn't not save him. Not because she'd made peace with who she was. Not because she'd decided to come back. The decision happened in her hands before it happened in her head. Muscle memory, maybe. Or maybe something closer to conscience, to a sense of what's right that runs deeper than whatever story she was telling herself about being afloat and staying invisible. That's what I mean when I think about integrity. Not the word, the way it gets used in mission statements and performance reviews. The actual thing, the quality of a person who does the right thing, even when they've spent 3 years building an entire life around not having to. Even when stepping forward costs them the one thing they'd managed to hold on to, which was anonymity, which was safety. Renata knew what walking across that bay meant. She did it anyway. That's not bravery in the cinematic sense. That's something quieter and harder. And then there's what she actually did once she got there. The needle decompression. The chest tube, without lidocaine, without full prep, without anyone telling her she was authorized. She knew what Rourke needed because she'd learned it in conditions that no simulation can replicate, and she applied that knowledge with a precision that came from years of doing hard things in bad places. Intelligence isn't always what we think it is. Sometimes it isn't about being the smartest person in the room. Sometimes it's about being the person who has learned, through real and costly experience, to see clearly under pressure. Renata saw clearly. She always had. But the thing that moves me most is the endurance of it, not the heroic kind, the quiet kind. 11 months of floating, 4 months before that, years of building a small, unremarkable life in the North, one Tim Hortons cup at a time, one shift at a time, carrying whatever she was carrying without making it anyone else's problem. That takes something. It takes a person who has decided repeatedly to keep going, even when keeping going looks like doing almost nothing. There's a strength in that which is easy to miss because it doesn't look like strength. It looks like a woman counting masks in a hospital hallway. She clicked her pen and kept counting. I don't know if she ever went back for the coin. I hope she did. I hope she picked it up and put it in her pocket and drove home through the birch trees, with it sitting heavy in her jacket, not as a summons, not as an obligation, just as a thing that was hers, a piece of evidence that she had existed, fully, in a moment that mattered. That's enough. Sometimes that's all there is, and it turns out it's enough.